I am convinced that when the people of the community understand the unbelievably unknown nature of the dangers, tampering with millions of years of evolution, they'll say no.
We, Science for the People, are here to try to bring the issues of this controversy to the public, to the people, because the people are at risk and are at benefit from the experiments that are being done with recombinant DNA.
It's not so much the technical issue of whether things are dangerous or not, as a fairly more obvious political issue, that looking at how decisions have been made and who's been making them and who's decided what's safe and what isn't, if you look at that closely, you really wonder what's going on.
I'm worried about all the presentations that were made by scientists at the city council meeting. It was stated in the city council that anything could come out. In fact, they don't even know what's going to eventually come out of this experimentation. It could be anything. It could be contamination, infections, something that could crawl out of the laboratory, such as a Frankenstein.
The city council should not...
Conspiracy theorists. They tell outlandish tales of government corruption and criminal elite activities. But none are as bold and outrageous as those of the antigen editor variety. On tonight's Poppy Parkway.
Has been generated that we want to work in a laboratory with things known to be dangerous. That's not at all the case. Nothing we plan to work with is known to be dangerous. Now, as to the unknown, one can do one's best about trying to figure out what might lie ahead, but research deals with the unknown.
The first news that I ever received of anybody being upset about the experiments we had in progress was a telephone call from one of my students who was attending a conference at Cold Spring Harbor. And she told me that in the course of the discussions there, she had mentioned the experiment that we intended to do and received rather severe criticism from a number of people. And she called me to relay this criticism and asked me what I thought about it. My initial reaction was, first of all, surprise, and then as I thought about it a bit, I thought it was even more outrageous than my initial reaction.
The truth is that genetically manipulating bacteria or even viruses is extremely safe and is of no concern to the general public. One such radical theory is this. Take this harmless E.Coli bacteria. It has the ability to pass along plasmids through an extension tube to other E.Coli bacteria. Now say a scientist chopped up frog DNA and then decided to splice the pieces into the E.Coli plasmid. Then that scientist accidentally or intentionally ingests the E.Coli bacteria. And bingo, frogman.
I don't think that one can just exclude the possibility of the outbreak of disease from recombinant DNA research. Most people that I know would agree that it's certainly possible in principle to construct some quite dangerous organisms by means of recombinant DNA research. And I don't see any way to rigorously exclude the possibility that such might arise inadvertently.
This is nothing more than sensationalized fear-mongering. Scientists are extremely meticulous and careful people, especially when conducting experiments. They would never act in a way that could harm you or the world you inhabit.
There's an outside chance that we may never find out what has been the cause of this. I think we will, but there are times when diseases baffle all of us.
Mysterious outbreaks of disease are not all that infrequent, and if one of these could logically or even plausibly be attributed to recombinant DNA, I think that would result in requirements for very real restrictions very severe restrictions on research of this kind, possibly even to its abandonment.
National Institute of Health Director Donald Frederickson.
Well, I thought perhaps that the problem might be most easily solved by banning this kind of research, and yet that thought didn't linger in my mind very long. First of all, there's no way it could be prescribed throughout the whole world community of science. And secondly, it would be wrong not to take advantage of the enormous potential of these techniques. Surely there had to be a way that we could find to use this technique in a prudent way that would permit it to continue without creating a disaster for the world.
Establish requirements that are far in excess of any risk that could be justified on the basis of any scientific evidence that exists today. Many of us have agreed that this would be necessary to begin because of political considerations and, in fact, to assuage the fears of the public. But on purely scientific grounds, I believe most scientists believe that the guidelines are excessive.
Ruth Hubbard, a Harvard conspiracy theory biologist, disagrees.
The guidelines are trying to trying to counteract hazards that they themselves say are unknown and, until much more work is done, unknowable. And I don't know how one can counteract hazards that one doesn't know and doesn't understand. So I think the very notion of formulating guidelines by way of reassurance, I think they may reassure the public. I think they may even reassure the investigators that they are doing the right thing. But what that right thing is and why they think it's the right thing is not at all clear to me.
Why, even Mayor Alfred Fauci has entangled up in the gene-editing conspiracy further.
Scientists are disagreeing with one another. Nobel Prize winners are disagreeing with Nobel Prize winners. And since they can't agree, that leaves it up to me as a layman to decide. And since I'm going to have to decide, then I'm going to have to take the side of those that disagree. They maintain that it is not a 100% guarantee. Since they take the stand that it's not 100% guarantee, and since the scientists who are favoring this agree that it's not 100%, that it is impossible to guarantee 100%, then I have to be the common man who has to say that if it is not 100%, then I will have to take the stand to oppose any of this kind of dangerous experimentation in the city of Cambridge.
If this research is being done now in industry, in various parts of this country that are not complying with the NIH guidelines, I mean, could that not be an ominous situation?
Well, it's very probable, Mr. Chairman, although I cannot tell you from certain knowledge, it's very probable that the precautions being taken by industry where it may be engaged in this may be every bit as stringent as the NIH.
But you don't know that, though.
I don't know that.
Now, you made the statement there's no known dangerous organism has ever been produced by a recombinant DNA experiment. Yes. Now, just what the hell do you think you're going to do if you do produce one?
The charged question was asked by David Plum.
Well, I tried to break down the issue into two facets. One is the scientific element, which is the potential of risk, how you define that risk, what the dangers could be. I discovered very early on that I am not technically capable or able to evaluate the element of scientific risk. So I looked at the other facet, which is the process that was used in establishing guidelines to control for danger. And I think, as a layperson, that I am able to come to grips with that process.
But these concerns are unwarranted, because Donald Frederickson held a public hearing before issuing the guidelines he and his scientists wrote.
The concept of scientists developing their own guidelines to do their own work under bothers me. I raised the issue with the representative from NIH whether or not she believed in civilian control of the military. And to me, that's the point. We don't want generals running the military any more than we want the automobile industry establishing pollution control standards or safety standards. And I don't think we want the scientists designing their own rules of the game.
Perhaps the conspiracy theorists are not considering the potential benefits. Washington attorney Peter Hutt.
The real issue here, from a public policy standpoint, is to balance, on the one hand, the benefit that can be obtained from recombinant DNA research against the risk that is inherent in any research, or indeed in any human endeavor. Now, I am not a scientist, I'm not a physician, but I see no one who has argued with the basic proposition that the potential benefit to mankind is enormous.
There's a rather novel aspect to the hazard here, that we're dealing with living organisms, and so that what we do may well be irreversible. As when such organisms are released into the environment, there's no simple way to just recall them or cease their manufacture. Some might inadvertently be harmful, not necessarily directly to man, but to other organisms on whose function we rely directly or indirectly. I think it's very, very difficult for us to predict that possibility. In effect, we are introducing organisms developed by a whole new mechanism, sort of like introducing a quantum step into evolution. And I don't believe we have the knowledge to predict the outcome.
Sinsheimer has a very personal view of the nature of the risks involved in recombinant DNA research. He imagines that there's a barrier that prevents the interchange of genetic material between simple forms of life and higher organisms. If you accept his view that that barrier dare not be breached without causing very extreme consequences in evolution, then the guidelines would be senseless. That is, it doesn't make any sense to rank experiments in terms of their potential risk if you assume that any of these experiments are risky. But as far as I know, most scientists do not acknowledge the existence of such a barrier, and there is no evidence to support such a barrier.
If it's an open, humane society, the technology will be used to prevent the suffering which now takes place when children are born with pathetic genetic defects. If it's some kind of monster society, an imaginably horrible Hitlerian type society, then who knows to what use it would be put. The important point here is not the nature of the technology, but the nature of society. Because without any technology at all, a monster society can do the most monstrous things.
Society has come to realize that there's a progression. Science, technology, social effects of that technology, which impact on everybody. And I think that we're kind of groping, rather the public is groping in a rather determined way for means to intervene in that progression so that it isn't just an inevitable sequence in which everybody is sort of a helpless pawn.
I think people are worried about more than the danger to the public health and environment. They're worried about the question of genetic engineering. There's a feeling that this type of research is a giant step in the direction of being forced to deal with questions that we just don't have answers for. The future of the species, the type of children we will have, the type of children we won't have. The people feel that this type of research is really taking us down that road very quickly. And although that issue hasn't been stated, I think it's very much in the public's mind.
I think that the public's fear of genetic engineering, in the sense that they understand it as a power or some dreadful capacity to change the nature of man, has entered, unfortunately, into this controversy, and in an unreasonable way. For surely these techniques are not at the present time designed to change human genetic material at all. Perhaps they might be used for that purpose in the future, but that's a long way off as I see it, and a matter which the public will have ample opportunity to control when the time comes.
We don't know whether recombinant DNA technology will lead to the ability to change human genes. It very well might. One thing we can be confident of, I think, is that ability will come. I don't think it's just nearby. It won't be next week. It won't be for many years, so far as I can see. But I think we can be pretty confident that as science moves ahead, that we will come to understand so much about fundamental biology that we will, yes, be able to change human genes and change what people are.
I think that the possibility of banning further research on recombinant DNA or suppressing the acquisition of further knowledge about it would be the worst possible step that we could take as a nation, or indeed as a world, or as a community, such as the community of Cambridge. I've never seen any problem solved in this country or anywhere in all civilization by suppressing inquiry, intellectual and academic inquiry.
I really have a great fear that turning off a line of research, particularly because we don't like the kind of information it might uncover, or we're fearful of the consequences of the information it might uncover, would set a very dangerous precedent. Because if it succeeds here, I can't see any reason why one would not begin to look at all forms of inquiry and ask, do we or do we not want to have the answers that these inquiries might turn up?
I think we have to be more realistic and understand that we have no assurance that science will not make the world a more dangerous place rather than a less dangerous place. That is, knowledge can bring us into a more hazardous situation. That still doesn't mean, to my mind, that we shouldn't acquire knowledge. But I think we have to be more careful both how we acquire it and how we use it.
What we're going to get, or what we might well get, is just a lot of mystery diseases cropping up in a lot of different places, conceivably or quite possibly cancers and things like that cropping up that have an enormous lead time, 15, 20 years, so that it'd be essentially impossible to ever track them back. And maybe looking back over this period, 30, 40 years hence, one will be able to say, oh yeah, something strange and different seems to have happened in the year 1975 or 1976. Because from then on, things look different in the pattern of disease incidents and so on. And that's what worries me, more than that we're going to produce one huge pandemic that's going to wipe us all out overnight.